The morning mist clung to the Welsh mountains surrounding Fort Sterling like a shroud, and Rebecca Lewis watched it through the ammunition depot window as she conducted her daily inventory. At 23, she had spent 18 months counting bullets with mathematical precision that bordered on obsessive. Every cartridge, every round, every piece of ordnance was accounted for in her meticulous logs. But Rebecca knew something her colleagues didn't. She could calculate the ballistic trajectory of every bullet she counted. "Hey, quartermaster!" Staff Sergeant David Thompson called from the depot entrance, using the nickname that had followed Rebecca around the base like a persistent shadow. Never Rebecca, never Lewis, always quartermaster. "We need ammunition for the morning exercise. Major Catherine Brennan wants the Barrett 50 caliber rounds ready in 20 minutes. Rebecca nodded professionally, though her pulse quickened at the mention of the Barrett. She knew that weapon system better than anyone on the base, having spent countless off-duty hours studying its technical specifications. What the others didn't realize was that Rebecca had grown up in rural Montana, where her grandfather had taught her to shoot before she could properly hold a rifle. By age 12, she could put 3 shots through the same hole at 200 meters. By 16, she was outshining experienced hunters in accuracy competitions across 3 states. But here at Fort Sterling, none of that mattered. Here, she was responsible for counting bullets, not firing them. The morning briefing was held in the main conference room, where tactical maps covered every available wall space. Rebecca took her usual seat near the back, her tablet ready to track ammunition requests for the day's exercises. She had learned to make herself invisible during these meetings, to blend into the background while the real soldiers discussed real missions. "Today's exercise is advanced long-range marksmanship training," Major Brennan announced, her voice cutting through the morning chatter. "We've got targets set up at distances from 800 to 1,200 meters in challenging mountain terrain. This is preparation for the Allied Command evaluation next month." Rebecca's pen stopped moving across her tablet. The Allied Command evaluation was the most prestigious marksmanship competition in European military circles. Winners earned slots in elite sniper units, advanced training opportunities, and the kind of recognition that could transform a career. "Participants for today's training," Brennan continued. "Rodriguez, you're our primary marksman. Thompson will spot. Williams will handle equipment transport. Davis will manage range safety." The familiar names rolled past Rebecca like a wave she couldn't catch. Rodriguez, the base's acknowledged shooting champion who had a tendency to miss his first shot but usually recovered. Thompson, whose spotting skills were adequate but who often miscalculated wind conditions. Williams, who treated expensive equipment like it was disposable. Lewis. Brennan's voice cut through Rebecca's thoughts. "You'll track ammunition expenditure and ensure proper weapon maintenance post-exercise." Ammunition expenditure again. Rebecca nodded professionally, hiding the disappointment that had become as familiar as her morning coffee. Around her, the selected marksmen exchanged confident grins and discussed strategy. She might as well have been furniture for all the attention they paid to her tactical input. After the briefing, Rebecca walked to the armory to prepare the weapons for transport. The Barrett 50 caliber rifles sat in their cases like sleeping giants, each one capable of precision that could change the outcome of a mission. She ran her hands over the first rifle, checking the scope mounts and bolt action with the familiarity of someone who truly understood the weapon. What the others didn't realize was that Rebecca had spent countless off-duty hours studying these rifles. She knew the ballistic coefficients of every round in inventory, had memorized the scope adjustments needed for various distances and weather conditions, could field strip and reassemble any weapon in the armory blindfolded. But when it came time to actually fire them in training exercises, she was always relegated to watching from the sidelines. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was responsible for maintaining weapons she wasn't allowed to use, for supplying ammunition for shots she wasn't permitted to take. That evening, as she secured the weapons after the day's training, Rebecca overheard a conversation that made her stomach clench with familiar frustration. Rodriguez's grouping was all over the place today, Thompson was saying to Williams as they passed the armory. 3 misses out of 10 shots at 800 meters. If that's our best for the Allied command evaluation, we're going to embarrass ourselves. At least he can handle the recoil, Williams replied. Did you see Lewis watching during the exercise? She was taking notes like she thought she could do better. Thompson laughed. Right. I'm sure our ammunition clerk could outshoot our designated marksman. Maybe she can count her way to better accuracy. They walked away, their laughter echoing off the armory walls. Rebecca stood in the silence that followed, her hands clenched around the cleaning rod she'd been using on Rodriguez's rifle. The weapon that had produced those scattered shots, that had missed 3 targets that should have been easy hits for any competent marksman. She looked down at the Barrett in her hands, its weight familiar and comforting. In her mind, she could see every target from today's exercise, could calculate the adjustments needed for wind and elevation, could visualize the perfect shot placement that would have put every round exactly where it needed to go. But visualization didn't matter when. No one would give you the chance to prove it. That night, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't earn respect through official channels, but there were other ways to prepare for opportunities that might never come. If Fort Sterling wouldn't train her, she would train herself. The pattern had been established from Rebecca's first week at Fort Sterling, and it had only grown more entrenched over the 18 months that followed. Every major training exercise, every skills assessment, every opportunity for advancement in marksmanship somehow managed to exclude her entirely. It started subtly. When Rebecca had first arrived and expressed interest in joining the base shooting team, she was told that the roster was full. When she volunteered for additional weapons training, she was informed that her primary duties in ammunition management took precedence. When she asked about attending the advanced marksmanship course at the regional training center, she was told that budget constraints limited participation to essential personnel only. Essential personnel apparently didn't include the person who knew more about ballistics and weapon systems than anyone else on the base. The exclusion became systematic. Training schedules were posted with her name conspicuously absent. Equipment. Assignments went to less qualified soldiers who happened to fit the unofficial profile of what a marksman should look like. Opportunities for specialized training were distributed among the same rotating group of men who formed the base's shooting elite. Rebecca watched from the margins as Rodriguez struggled with basic windage calculations that she could have solved. In her head, she bit her tongue when Thompson made scope adjustments that she knew were incorrect. She forced herself to remain silent when Williams mishandled equipment worth more than most people's annual salary. The justifications for her exclusion were never explicitly stated. The day hung in the air like morning mist over the Welsh mountains. Too small to handle the recoil of heavy weapons. Too precise in her work to be aggressive enough for tactical shooting. Too quiet and methodical to fit the dynamic image of an elite marksman. But the real reason, the one that no one would say aloud, was simpler. She was the ammunition clerk. In the rigid hierarchy of military specialization, that label had become a box that defined not just what she did, but what she was capable of doing. It didn't matter that her knowledge of ballistics exceeded that of many infantry officers. It didn't matter that her understanding of weapon systems was encyclopedic. She counted bullets. Therefore, she couldn't be trusted to fire them when it mattered. The breakthrough she'd been hoping for seemed to arrive when Sergeant Major Williams announced the formation of a new competitive shooting team to represent Fort Sterling in regional competitions. Rebecca submitted her application the same day, along with a detailed portfolio of her technical knowledge and a formal request to demonstrate her shooting abilities. The response came a week later in the form of a brief note. "Thank you for your interest. Your current duties in ammunition management are too critical to permit additional commitments." Meanwhile, 3 soldiers with significantly less experience and inferior technical knowledge were selected for the team. Rebecca watched them practice from the ammunition depot, noting their fundamental errors in technique and equipment handling while she cataloged the rounds they wasted through poor shooting. The message was clear: stay in your lane. Count your bullets and leave the real soldiering to the real soldiers. But Rebecca had never been good at staying in lanes that were too small for her abilities. Every evening, after completing her official duties, she continued studying ballistics tables, weather patterns, and terrain analysis. She memorized the technical specifications of every weapon system on the base, and most that weren't, because Rebecca had learned something important during her months of exclusion. Preparation wasn't just about being ready for opportunities. Sometimes it was about being ready to create them. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning that dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect shooting weather that made Rebecca's fingers itch for a rifle trigger. Major Brennan stood at the front of the briefing room, her expression more serious than usual. "The Allied Command evaluation has been moved up," she announced. "We have 2 weeks to select and prepare our representative team. This is our opportunity to demonstrate Fort Sterling's capabilities on an international stage." Rebecca felt her heart rate increase. 2 weeks. After 18 months of waiting, watching, and preparing, this could finally be her chance. The Allied Command evaluation was the most prestigious marksmanship competition in European military circles, drawing elite shooters from every major base across the continent. She had spent countless hours studying previous competitions, analyzing the shooting scenarios, memorizing the technical requirements. She knew the distances: 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters. She knew the time constraints: 2 minutes per target engagement. She knew the environmental factors: mountain terrain, variable wind conditions, and challenging target placement. More importantly, she knew she could win it. "Selection trials will be held this Friday," Brennan continued. "Open to all qualified marksmen with current certifications in long-range precision shooting." Rebecca's optimism crashed like a stone through thin ice. Current certifications. She had never been allowed to obtain the certifications required because she had never been permitted to participate in the training programs where those certifications were earned. It was a perfect bureaucratic circle designed to exclude her while maintaining the appearance of fairness. She raised her hand anyway. "Ma'am, what about personnel who haven't had the opportunity to obtain those certifications, but who possess the necessary skills?" The room went quiet. Several soldiers turned to look at her with expressions ranging from confusion to mild amusement. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Lewis, the certifications exist for a reason. They ensure that participants have been properly trained and evaluated according to military standards. We can't make exceptions based on theoretical capabilities." "But ma'am," Rebecca persisted, feeling heat rise in her cheeks but pressing forward anyway. "What if someone could demonstrate those capabilities during the trial itself? Wouldn't actual performance be more relevant than paperwork?" Rodriguez spoke up from the front row, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never been denied an opportunity. "With respect, Lewis, these competitions aren't the place for on-the-job training. We need people who have proven themselves under pressure, not ammunition clerks who think they understand shooting because they count bullets." The words hit like physical blows. Around the room, she saw nods of agreement and barely suppressed smiles. The message was clear: know your place. Stay in your lane. Leave the real work to the real soldiers. What they didn't know was that Rebecca had been conducting her own training program in secret for months. While Rodriguez practiced with standard military precision and Thompson struggled with basic wind calculations, Rebecca had been developing capabilities that exceeded anything required for the Allied command. Evaluation. It started with the night shift. 3 times a week, Rebecca volunteered for overnight ammunition security duty, ostensibly to earn extra pay and demonstrate dedication to her assigned role. What she actually did during those long, quiet hours was far more valuable than anyone realized. The ammunition depot had direct access to detailed weather monitoring equipment used for calculating ballistic conditions during training exercises. While the base slept, Rebecca studied wind patterns, barometric pressure changes, and temperature fluctuations with the intensity of a meteorologist. More importantly, the depot's computer system contained historical data from every training exercise conducted at Fort Sterling over the past 5 years. Rebecca analyzed thousands of shots, correlating weather conditions with accuracy rates, identifying patterns that revealed the technical deficiencies in the base's shooting program. She discovered that most failures weren't due to equipment problems or difficult conditions, but to fundamental misunderstandings of ballistic principles. The data painted a clear picture. Fort Sterling's marksmen were consistently making the same mistakes year after year because no one truly understood the science behind precision shooting. But Rebecca's real secret weapon was hidden in a storage locker she rented in the nearby village. Inside that nondescript metal container was equipment that would have shocked her colleagues. A precision shooting setup that rivaled anything in the military arsenal. She had purchased the components over months using her accumulated leave pay, researching each piece with the thoroughness of a procurement specialist. A civilian precision rifle chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, capable of accurate shots beyond 1,500 meters. A high-end telescopic sight with ballistic computer integration, range-finding equipment, weather monitoring tools, and ammunition loaded to specifications that exceeded military standards. Every weekend, Rebecca drove into the remote Welsh countryside where her grandfather had taught her to shoot decades earlier. The family farm was isolated enough to provide training opportunities that no military range could offer. Shots across valleys, engagements from unusual angles, precision shooting in challenging weather conditions that most soldiers never experienced. She practiced scenarios that went far beyond standard military training, shooting from improvised positions that simulated real-world tactical situations, engaging targets at extreme distances where environmental factors became critical, rapid target transitions that tested both accuracy and speed under pressure. Most importantly, she practiced with ammunition that matched the Barrett .50 caliber system that Fort Sterling used for long-range precision shooting. She had quietly studied technical manuals, analyzed ballistic tables, and even acquired civilian ammunition that matched military specifications. But all of this preparation remained hidden, locked away in civilian storage and private training sessions that no one at Fort Sterling knew about. Rebecca continued to play her assigned role as the meticulous ammunition clerk while secretly developing capabilities that could have revolutionized the base's shooting program. The first sign that her dedication was being viewed with suspicion rather than admiration came during a routine equipment inspection 3 weeks after the Allied Command Evaluation announcement. She was conducting her weekly inventory of precision ammunition when Sergeant Williams appeared in the depot doorway, his expression more serious than their usual professional interactions warranted. "Lewis," he said, stepping into the storage area and closing the door behind him, "we need to discuss some irregularities in your access logs." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the depot's climate control. "What kind of irregularities, Sergeant?" Williams consulted his tablet, scrolling through data with deliberate slowness. Your security badge shows unusual patterns of after-hours access. Multiple overnight sessions that extend beyond your assigned duty periods. Time spent in restricted technical libraries, accessing materials outside your authorization level. The accusations were technically accurate, but completely missed the context. Rebecca had been using her legitimate access to conduct research that made her better at her job, but she could see how that dedication might appear suspicious to someone looking for problems. I've been studying ballistic data to improve ammunition management efficiency, she replied carefully. Understanding how different rounds perform under various conditions helps me make better inventory recommendations. Ammunition clerks don't need to understand ballistic performance, Williams said sharply. They need to count inventory and process requisitions. Your job description doesn't include conducting independent research on topics outside your expertise. Over the following days, she noticed other changes in how her colleagues interacted with her. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Her routine requests for equipment access took longer to process. During briefings, her questions were met with skeptical looks rather than professional consideration. The suspicion crystallized during a conversation she wasn't supposed to overhear. Rebecca was returning her lunch tray when she caught fragments of discussion from a nearby table, where several senior enlisted personnel were eating. I'm just saying Lewis spends an awful lot of time studying things that aren't really her concern, Corporal Davis was saying to his companions. Ballistic tables, weather data, equipment specifications for weapons she's not qualified to use. Maybe she's just dedicated to her job, suggested another voice, though it lacked conviction. Dedicated is one thing, but she's asking questions about operational procedures, training schedules, competition protocols, stuff that goes way beyond ammunition management. Makes you wonder what she's really planning. Rebecca stood frozen behind a support pillar, her empty tray forgotten in her hands. Her months of preparation and study were being reframed as potentially suspicious activity. The dedication that should have earned respect was instead generating doubt about her intentions. Plus, there's the timing, Davis continued. All this extra research started right around when the Allied Command evaluation was announced. Like she's building a case for something. You think she's planning to make trouble? File some kind of complaint about not being selected? I think she's got ideas above her station, and people with ideas above their station can become problems for everyone else. That night, Rebecca lay in her quarters staring at the ceiling, realizing that her secret preparation hadn't been as secret as she believed. The pattern of her after-hours research, her technical questions, her obvious frustration with limitations, all of it had been noticed and interpreted in the worst possible light. She was trapped between accepting limitations that would waste her potential and pushing forward in ways that would be seen as inappropriate or threatening. Either choice felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked to become. But Rebecca had learned something important about institutional resistance. During her months of exclusion, sometimes the only way to prove your worth was to make it impossible for others to ignore. The question was whether she would have the courage to seize that moment. When it finally arrived, the crisis Rebecca had been dreading arrived on a Thursday morning when the Welsh sky was gray with threatening clouds, the kind of weather that made precision shooting challenging for everyone except those who truly understood environmental ballistics. She was summoned to Major Brennan's office at 800 hours, but this time she wasn't alone. Sergeant Major Williams sat to the left of Brennan's desk, his expression stern and official. To the right was Captain Morrison from Base Security, his presence indicating that this meeting had escalated beyond personnel management into something more serious. The arrangement felt like a tribunal, with Rebecca cast in the role of the accused. "Lewis, sit down," Brennan said, her voice carrying none of the collegial tone from their previous interactions. "We need to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention." Rebecca remained at attention until specifically directed to sit, her military bearing impeccable despite the growing knot in her stomach. She had prepared for this moment, knowing that her activities would eventually attract official scrutiny. But the reality felt more intimidating than her mental rehearsals had suggested. Over the past several weeks, Williams began consulting a thick folder that seemed to contain detailed documentation of her activities. There have been multiple reports of behavior that raises questions about your adherence to assigned duties and respect for operational boundaries. "What specific behavior, Sergeant Major?" Rebecca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Captain Morrison leaned forward, his security background evident in his direct approach. "Unauthorized research into classified ballistic data. Extended access to technical materials outside your clearance level. Questions about operational procedures that have no relevance to ammunition management. Pattern recognition suggests intelligence gathering or preparation for activities outside your authorized role." The words hit like accusations in a court-martial. Rebecca's months of dedicated preparation were being characterized as potentially subversive activities. Her desire to excel was being treated as evidence of inappropriate intentions. "Sir, I've been studying materials that help me perform my assigned duties more effectively," she replied carefully. "Understanding ballistic performance helps me make better recommendations about ammunition selection and storage protocols." "Lewis," Brennan interrupted, her tone sharp with authority. "Ammunition clerks don't need to understand advanced ballistic theory. They need to count inventory and follow requisition procedures. Your research into sniper techniques, long-range shooting protocols, and competitive marksmanship standards has nothing to do with your assigned responsibilities." The frustration that had been building for months threatened to spill over. Rebecca took a deep breath before responding. "Ma'am, with respect, understanding how our equipment is actually used in the field makes me more effective at supporting those who use it." "That's not your determination to make," Williams said firmly. "Your job parameters are clearly defined. When personnel start conducting independent research into operational areas outside their authorization, it creates security concerns and questions about their ultimate intentions." Morrison nodded in agreement. The pattern of behavior suggests someone preparing for roles they're not qualified for, or gathering information they're not authorized to possess. Either scenario represents a potential security risk. Rebecca felt the walls closing in around her. Her dedication was being reframed as a security threat, her expertise dismissed as unauthorized overreach. The very qualities that should have made her valuable were being used as evidence against her. "Furthermore," Brennan continued, opening another section of the file, "your reaction to being excluded from the Allied Command Evaluation Team suggests difficulty accepting appropriate limitations on your role. Several personnel have reported conversations where you expressed frustration with assignment decisions that are well within command prerogative. I never questioned the chain of command, ma'am. I only suggested that performance should be considered alongside credentials. Suggesting that command decisions are based on inadequate criteria is questioning the chain of command," Morrison stated flatly, "implying that you're more qualified than selected personnel despite lacking proper authorization is insubordination." The meeting was spiraling into territory that could end her military career. Rebecca realized that her passion for excellence was being systematically reinterpreted as evidence of insubordination, security risk, and inappropriate ambition. "Lewis," Brennan said, her voice taking on the tone of official pronouncement, "effective. Immediately, your access to technical materials outside your direct job requirements is revoked. Your security clearance for ballistic data is reduced to basic ammunition specifications only. You are prohibited from conducting research into operational procedures that fall outside ammunition management. Each restriction felt like a door slamming shut. Rebecca was being systematically stripped of the resources she had used to develop her capabilities, locked into a role that would prevent any further growth or preparation. Additionally, Williams added, you will report to your immediate supervisor daily regarding your activities and time allocation. Any deviation from assigned duties must be pre-approved through proper channels. And finally, Morrison concluded, any further evidence of activities outside your authorized role will result in formal disciplinary action up to and including court-martial for violation of security protocols. The three officers stared at her expectantly, waiting for acknowledgement of the restrictions that would effectively end her development as anything beyond an ammunition clerk. Rebecca felt the weight of 18 months of preparation being dismissed, her potential being artificially constrained by people who couldn't see past her job title. Do you understand these directives, Lewis? Brennan asked. Rebecca looked at each of them in turn, seeing the satisfied expressions of people who believed they had solved a problem by eliminating someone who threatened their comfortable assumptions about capability and role limitations. I understand perfectly, ma'am, she replied, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. But understanding and accepting were two entirely different things. As she left the office, Rebecca realized that she had been given a choice. Accept artificial limitations that would waste her potential, or find another way to prove that capability mattered more than credentials. The decision, when it came, would surprise everyone involved. That evening, Rebecca sat in her quarters, reviewing the restrictions that had been placed on her. She was now prohibited from studying the very subjects that could make her excellent at tasks they claimed she wasn't qualified to perform. Her curiosity was being treated as a liability, her preparation as evidence of dangerous ambition. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. While Fort Sterling's designated marksman continued to waste ammunition and miss targets during routine training exercises, she was being prevented from acquiring the knowledge that could help them improve. The base was actively suppressing expertise in favor of maintaining comfortable hierarchies. But Rebecca had learned something important during her months of secret preparation. Institutional barriers could prevent official recognition, but they couldn't prevent competence. Knowledge, once gained, couldn't be confiscated. Skills, once developed, couldn't be revoked by administrative decree. They could restrict her access to technical manuals, but they couldn't erase what she had already learned. They could prevent her from asking questions, but they couldn't prevent her from knowing the answers. They could exclude her from training opportunities, but they couldn't exclude her from being ready when opportunity finally arrived. As she looked out her window at the Welsh mountains, where she had spent countless weekends developing capabilities that exceeded military standards, Rebecca made a silent promise. When the moment came, and she believed it would come, she would be ready to prove that competence mattered more than credentials. That performance trumped paperwork. That excellence couldn't be contained by institutional limitations. The question wasn't whether she would have the opportunity to demonstrate her abilities. The question was whether Fort Sterling's leadership would have the wisdom to recognize what they had been systematically ignoring. Admiral Harrison arrived at Fort Sterling on a crisp Monday morning when the Welsh mountains were painted silver with early frost. His presence transformed the usually routine base operations into a spectacle of military precision, with personnel scrambling to ensure everything met the exacting standards expected by European Allied Command's highest-ranking marksmanship. Authority. Rebecca first saw the Admiral during the formal inspection ceremony, where he moved through the ranks with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. At 62, Harrison commanded respect through decades of legendary shooting achievements and an uncompromising approach to military excellence. His arrival at Fort Sterling wasn't ceremonial, it was investigative. Word had reached Allied Command about Fort Sterling's consistently mediocre performance in regional competitions. Despite having excellent facilities, superior equipment, and adequate personnel, the base had failed to produce marksmen capable of representing European forces in international competitions. Harrison was here to determine why resources were being wasted and whether command changes were necessary. Rebecca watched from her position in the ammunition depot as the admiral conducted his initial assessment. Even from a distance, she could see the disapproval in his expression as he reviewed performance records, equipment maintenance logs, and training schedules. This was a man who had spent his career developing precision shooting programs across Europe, and he clearly wasn't impressed with what he was finding at Fort Sterling. The crisis began during what should have been a routine demonstration of Fort Sterling's marksmanship capabilities. Harrison had requested a live-fire exercise featuring the base's elite shooting team, expecting to see the skills that justified their positions and resources. What he witnessed instead was a masterclass in institutional mediocrity. Rebecca was summoned to provide ammunition support for the demonstration, giving her a front-row seat to watch 18 months of her frustrations play out in real time. Rodriguez took the first shots at 800 meters using the Barrett .50 caliber rifle that represented the pinnacle of precision shooting technology. His first round missed the target entirely, sailing high and right due to improper wind compensation. The second shot hit the target, but in the outer rings, far from the precision expected at that distance. By his third attempt, Harrison's expression had shifted from expectant to incredulous. Thompson's spotting was equally problematic. His wind calls were inconsistent, his range estimations were imprecise, and his communication with Rodriguez lacked the crisp professionalism that effective shooting teams required. The partnership that should have demonstrated seamless coordination instead revealed fundamental gaps in training and understanding. Williams's equipment handling was perhaps the most embarrassing aspect of the demonstration. He misadjusted the scope between shooting positions, failed to properly secure the rifle during movement, and showed unfamiliarity with basic maintenance procedures. Watching him handle precision equipment worth tens of thousands of pounds was like watching someone perform surgery with garden tools. From her position at the ammunition table, Rebecca could see exactly what was going wrong. The ammunition selection was inappropriate for current conditions. Rodriguez was using 750 grain match rounds that performed well in stable temperatures, but the day's thermal variations required 800 grain rounds with different ballistic coefficients. Additionally, the scope adjustments weren't compensated for the 15-degree temperature drop since yesterday's zeroing. She wanted to speak up, to offer the technical corrections that would salvage the demonstration, but her recent restrictions made any such intervention impossible. She was there to count ammunition, not to provide ballistic expertise. The real crisis emerged when Harrison requested shots at 1,200 meters, the maximum effective range that would be required in operational scenarios. Rodriguez's grouping at that distance was so scattered that several rounds missed the target frame entirely. The few hits that connected were spread across an area that would have been ineffective in any tactical situation. Harrison stopped the demonstration after 20 minutes, his face grim with the realization that Fort Sterling's elite team was fundamentally unqualified for the roles they had been assigned. The silence that followed was more damning than any verbal criticism could have been. "Major Brennan," Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate solutions. "I need to speak with whoever is responsible for ammunition selection and ballistic calculations for these exercises." Brennan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Sir, our ammunition is managed by our logistics specialist, but tactical decisions are made by the qualified marksman. The qualified marksman just demonstrated that they don't understand basic ballistic principles. Harrison replied sharply. Someone selected ammunition that was inappropriate for these conditions, and someone calculated environmental factors incorrectly. I want to speak with whoever actually understands the technical aspects of precision shooting. The request created an immediate dilemma for the Fort Sterling command structure. The person who best understood ballistics and ammunition performance was Rebecca, but acknowledging her expertise would mean admitting that their elite team was less knowledgeable than their ammunition clerk. After a brief consultation with Williams, Brennan made the reluctant decision to summon Rebecca to the firing range. She arrived within minutes, her uniform immaculate and her bearing professional, despite the unusual circumstances of being called before Allied Command's most senior marksmanship authority. "Lewis," Harrison said, studying her with the intensity of someone accustomed to rapid personnel assessment. "I'm told you manage ammunition for this facility. Can you explain why the rounds used in this demonstration were producing such inconsistent results?" Rebecca looked at the scattered target sheets, the environmental conditions, and the equipment setup. The problems were immediately obvious to someone who understood the relationship between ammunition characteristics, weather factors, and precision requirements. "Sir, the ammunition selected was inappropriate for current conditions," she replied professionally. "The 750-grain match rounds perform well in stable temperatures, but today's thermal variations require 800-grain rounds with different ballistic coefficients. Additionally, the scope adjustments weren't compensated for the 15-degree temperature drop since yesterday's zeroing." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. The technical accuracy of her assessment was immediately apparent to someone of his experience. "And you determined this how?" "By correlating ballistic performance data with current environmental conditions. Sir, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure all affect projectile trajectory. The ammunition selection should be matched to conditions rather than using standard loads regardless of variables." The admiral looked from Rebecca to the scattered targets, then back to Rodriguez and his team. The contrast was stark. An ammunition clerk who understood the science of precision shooting versus designated marksmen who were essentially guessing their way through technical requirements. "Lewis," Harrison said, his voice carrying implications that would change everything, "show me what you mean. Make the corrections you think are necessary and demonstrate the difference." The moment that would define Rebecca's entire military career had arrived. She looked at the Barrett .50 caliber rifle, the same weapon system she had studied obsessively but never been allowed to use in official capacity. Around her, the Fort Sterling leadership watched with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright horror at the implications of what Harrison was requesting. For 18 months, she had been told she wasn't qualified, wasn't authorized, wasn't suitable for precision shooting roles. Now the highest marksmanship authority in European Allied Command was asking her to prove otherwise. The choice was simple: maintain the comfortable fiction that credentials mattered more than capability, or demonstrate that competence couldn't be confined by job descriptions and bureaucratic limitations. Rebecca stepped toward the rifle, knowing that everything she had prepared for was about to be tested in the most public and consequential way possible. "Admiral," Harrison's request hung in the air like the report of a rifle shot, reverberating through the chain of command with implications that no one at Fort Sterling was prepared to handle. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Major Brennan, Sergeant Major Williams, and the assembled personnel grappled with a scenario that their rigid hierarchy hadn't anticipated. "Sir," Brennan finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled but clearly strained. "Lewis is an ammunition specialist, not a qualified marksman. She doesn't have the certifications required for handling precision weapons in demonstrations." Harrison's Expression shifted to something approaching disbelief. Major, I just watched your qualified marksman miss a target the size of a dinner table at 1,200 meters. Your ammunition specialist just provided a technical analysis that demonstrates superior understanding of ballistic principles. Are you seriously suggesting that paperwork is more important than competence? The question cut to the heart of the institutional dysfunction that had plagued Fort Sterling for months. Williams stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable, but committed to defending established protocols. Admiral, with respect, allowing unqualified personnel to handle precision weapons during official demonstrations would violate safety regulations and operational procedures. Lewis lacks the proper training certifications and hasn't been evaluated according to military standards. The proper training certifications, Harrison repeated slowly, his tone suggesting dangerous patience, produced. Marksmen who can't hit targets at operational distances. The military standards that resulted in ammunition selection so inappropriate that it guaranteed mission failure. Rebecca stood frozen between competing authorities, watching as her expertise became the center of a confrontation that could reshape Fort Sterling's entire approach to marksmanship training. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle lay on the shooting bench, its precision capabilities waiting to be properly utilized. Rodriguez chose that moment to reassert his position as the base's designated expert. Sir, I understand the demonstration didn't meet expectations, but the solution isn't to hand precision weapons to personnel who haven't proven themselves under pressure. Lewis may understand ballistic theory, but shooting in classroom conditions is completely different from performing under stress. The irony of Rodriguez questioning someone else's ability to perform under pressure wasn't lost on Rebecca. Given his consistent failures during every high-stakes exercise, but his intervention provided Brennan with the support she needed to maintain institutional authority. Admiral Harrison, she said with renewed confidence, I cannot authorize unqualified personnel to handle precision weapons during official evaluations. The liability issues alone would be unprecedented. If Lewis wants to demonstrate shooting capabilities, she needs to go through proper channels and obtain appropriate certifications. The proper channels, Harrison said, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that experienced military personnel recognized as a warning, that have consistently failed to identify and develop actual talent in favor of maintaining comfortable mediocrity. Thompson joined the resistance, clearly threatened by the implications of Rebecca's technical knowledge. Sir, there's also the physical considerations. The Barrett .50 caliber produces significant recoil forces. Personnel who haven't been properly conditioned for heavy weapons can be injured or cause equipment damage. The suggestion that Rebecca couldn't handle the physical demands of precision shooting revealed the depth of their assumptions about her capabilities. Around the firing range, other personnel nodded in agreement, comfortable with explanations that preserved existing power structures. Davis added his voice to the chorus of objections. Plus, there's the team dynamics to consider. Precision shooting requires coordination between marksman and spotter. Lewis doesn't have experience working within established protocols. Each objection revealed the circular logic that had trapped Rebecca for 18 months. She couldn't get experience because she lacked qualifications, and she couldn't get qualifications because she lacked experience. The system was designed to exclude her while maintaining the appearance of fairness. Harrison looked around the assembled group, his expression reflecting growing frustration with institutional resistance to obvious solutions. So your position is that rather than allowing someone who understands ballistic science to demonstrate proper technique, you prefer to continue with personnel who have just proven they lack fundamental competence. Our position, Brennan replied, firmly, is that military regulations exist for important reasons. Safety protocols and certification requirements protect both personnel and equipment. We cannot make exceptions based on theoretical knowledge. Theoretical knowledge, Harrison repeated, his tone suggesting that his patience was nearing its limit. The kind of theoretical knowledge that correctly identified the ammunition. Problems your qualified experts completely missed. Williams attempted to redirect the conversation toward more comfortable territory. Sir, if you're concerned about Fort Sterling's marksmanship capabilities, we can request additional training resources or personnel transfers. We don't need to bypass established procedures. The suggestion represented everything wrong with institutional thinking. Rather than recognizing and utilizing existing talent, the solution was to import expertise from elsewhere while continuing to waste the capabilities already present. Additional training, Harrison said slowly, for personnel who have just demonstrated that they don't understand basic principles that your ammunition clerk explained in 30 seconds. Captain Morrison, who had been silent during the confrontation, finally spoke up with the voice of security bureaucracy. Admiral, allowing unauthorized personnel to handle classified weapon systems during official evaluations could create precedents that compromise operational security across multiple facilities. The escalation to security concerns represented the final refuge of administrators who prioritize process over performance. Every objection revealed the depth of institutional investment in maintaining existing hierarchies regardless of their effectiveness. Harrison stood in silence for a long moment, studying the faces around him with the expression of someone recognizing the scope of systemic dysfunction. The best ballistic expert on the base was being prevented from demonstrating solutions by people whose primary concern was protecting their authority rather than improving performance. Major Brennan, he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of command authority, you're telling me that rather than allowing 30 seconds of shooting demonstration by someone who clearly understands precision marksmanship better than your designated experts, you prefer to continue with a program that has consistently failed to meet operational standards? Sir, we prefer to follow established procedures while working within proper channels to address any performance issues. The response perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with Fort Sterling's approach. Bureaucratic process trumped practical results. Credentials mattered more than competence, and protecting existing authority structures was more important than mission effectiveness. But Harrison had seen enough institutional resistance for one day. His next decision would bypass every objection they had raised and prove that sometimes competence couldn't be contained by bureaucratic limitations. Admiral Harrison's frustration had been building throughout the morning, but it reached a breaking point when he realized that Fort Sterling's leadership was more committed to protecting their authority than solving their performance problems. The sight of scattered targets, wasted ammunition, and stubborn bureaucracy representing European Allied Command's marksmanship standards was more than he could tolerate. Major Brennan, Harrison said, his voice carrying the dangerous calm that preceded command decisions. I've spent 30 years developing precision shooting programs across Europe. I've seen incompetence disguised as protocol, and I've watched talent wasted because it didn't fit convenient categories. What I'm witnessing here represents everything wrong with institutional thinking. The assembled Fort Sterling personnel shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the conversation was moving beyond their control. Brennan maintained her professional composure, but her expression revealed awareness that she was facing a superior officer whose patience had been exhausted. Sir, I understand your concerns, but we must operate within established guidelines. Military discipline requires adherence to proper procedures, regardless of circumstances. Harrison's response cut through the bureaucratic deflection like a precision shot through morning mist. Military discipline requires achieving mission objectives with available resources. Your established guidelines have produced consistent failure while ignoring obvious solutions. He turned to face Rebecca directly, his experienced eyes assessing her. with the intensity of someone who had spent decades identifying exceptional talent in unexpected places. "Lewis, do you believe you can demonstrate proper shooting technique with that Barrett rifle?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that would define everything that followed. Rebecca looked at the weapon, then at the scattered targets that represented 18 months of institutional mediocrity, then at the faces around her filled with skepticism and barely concealed hostility. "Yes, sir," she replied without hesitation. "I can demonstrate proper technique and hit targets that your qualified marksman missed." The certainty in her voice surprised everyone, including herself. But months of secret preparation, years of shooting experience, and a lifetime of being underestimated had crystallized into absolute confidence in her capabilities. Williams stepped forward, his voice urgent with concern for protocols that were being swept aside. "Admiral, I must formally object to this course of action. Allowing unauthorized personnel to handle precision weapons violates multiple safety regulations and could result in serious disciplinary consequences for everyone involved." "Sergeant Major," Harrison replied, his tone suggesting that formal objections were irrelevant. "I am the highest marksmanship authority in European Allied Command. I am authorizing this demonstration under my direct supervision and full responsibility." The declaration transformed the situation from local insubordination to command override. Harrison was using his authority to bypass every regulation and protocol that Fort Sterling's leadership had hidden behind. The comfortable barriers that had protected incompetence were being demolished by someone with sufficient rank to ignore institutional resistance. Brennan made one final attempt to maintain control. "Sir, even under your authorization, we cannot guarantee equipment safety or personnel protection if unqualified individuals attempt to use precision weapons beyond their training level." Harrison's patience finally snapped. "Major, you're qualified. Individuals just demonstrated that they couldn't hit targets under ideal conditions with perfect equipment. Your unqualified individual just provided technical analysis that revealed superior understanding of ballistic science. I'm beginning to question who actually lacks qualifications here." The rebuke carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate demonstration. Harrison was suggesting that Fort Sterling's entire approach to identifying and developing talent was fundamentally flawed, that their hierarchy was protecting incompetence while suppressing excellence. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, his voice rising with authority, "if Lewis fails to demonstrate superior performance, she faces the consequences of her overconfidence. If she succeeds, then this entire command structure faces consequences for wasting talent that could have improved European Allied capabilities." The stakes had been clearly defined. This wasn't just about one demonstration. It was about institutional accountability and the cost of maintaining systems that prioritize credentials over competence. Rebecca realized that the moment of decision had arrived. She could retreat into the safety of her assigned role, accepting limitations that others had imposed, or step forward into a future that would be defined by performance rather than permissions. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was choosing, "I'm ready to demonstrate that capability matters more than credentials." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Then demonstrate, Lewis. Show these people what happens when preparation meets opportunity." As Rebecca stepped toward the Barrett rifle, she crossed an invisible line between following orders and proving worth. Behind her, the Fort Sterling command structure watched with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Ahead of her lay the opportunity she had prepared for through 18 months of secret training and a lifetime of being told she wasn't enough, that the weapon felt familiar in her hands despite never having fired it in official capacity. Every hour of civilian training, every night of ballistic study, every moment of preparation had led to this singular opportunity to prove that credentials and institutional approval mattered less than knowledge. skill, and determination dot around her. The firing range had fallen silent except for the whisper of Welsh wind across the mountains. Everyone present understood they were witnessing a moment that would either validate existing hierarchies or shatter them entirely. Rebecca chambered around with smooth precision, adjusted the scope with movements that revealed intimate familiarity with the weapon system, and settled into a shooting position that demonstrated training far beyond anything her colleagues had suspected. The point of no return had been crossed. What happened next would either prove that the institutional gatekeepers had been right to exclude her, or demonstrate that they had been systematically wasting exceptional talent for reasons that had nothing to do with actual capability. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle felt like an extension of Rebecca's body as she settled into position, her movements fluid and confident despite the tension crackling through the air around her. Every eye on the firing range was focused on her, some expecting spectacular failure, others beginning to suspect they were about to witness something unprecedented. Admiral Harrison stood slightly behind and to her right, his experienced gaze taking in details that revealed the depth of her preparation. Her grip was perfect, her breathing controlled, her body positioning textbook precise. This wasn't someone attempting to use unfamiliar equipment. This was someone who had clearly mastered the weapon system through extensive unauthorized training. "Lewis," Harrison said quietly, "what's your assessment of current conditions?" Rebecca didn't need to check instruments or consult tables. Months of studying environmental factors had taught her to read conditions intuitively. Wind is variable, 3 to 5 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature is 42 degrees. Humidity at 68%. Barometric pressure is stable at 30.15 inches. The precision of her environmental assessment silenced any remaining doubts about her technical knowledge. Rodriguez had needed equipment to make similar calculations, and his results had been less accurate despite having official authorization to use the instruments. "Target selection?" Harrison asked, testing her tactical understanding. Rebecca studied the range where targets had been placed at various distances and positions. The 1,200-meter target that your qualified marksman missed multiple times. Dead center bullseye shot. The audacity of her choice sent ripples of shock through the assembled personnel. She was proposing to hit on her first official shot, a target that the base's elite marksman had failed to engage successfully after multiple attempts. Behind her, she heard Williams whisper urgently to Brennan, "This is insane. We need to stop this before she embarrasses herself and damages expensive equipment." But Harrison raised his hand for silence. "Lewis, you have authorization to fire when ready." Rebecca adjusted the scope with movements so smooth they appeared choreographed. She understood the Barrett's ballistic characteristics better than the manual specifications, knew exactly how environmental conditions would affect projectile trajectory, could calculate the precise adjustments needed for a perfect shot. Her breathing settled into the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times during her secret training sessions. The noise of the firing range faded until only the whisper of wind and the steady beat of her heart remained audible. Time seemed to slow as she aligned the crosshairs with mathematical precision. The trigger brake was perfect smooth, controlled, with no jerking or flinching that could disturb accuracy. The Barrett's report thundered across the range like the voice of authority itself, its muzzle blast kicking up dust and debris in a demonstration of raw power harnessed with surgical precision. Downrange. The 1,200-meter target showed the result immediately. A perfect bullseye, dead center, exactly where Rebecca had intended the shot to go. The kind of precision that elite snipers achieved after years of specialized training, delivered by an ammunition clerk on her first official shot with the weapon. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone on the firing range stared at the target, then at Rebecca, then back at the target. struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The shot had been so perfect, so effortlessly executed, that it seemed to defy every assumption they had held about capability and qualification. Harrison was the first to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and vindication. "Outstanding shot, Lewis. Now do it again." The second shot was even more impressive because it demonstrated that the first hadn't been luck. Rebecca chambered another round, made minor adjustments for the slight wind shift that had occurred, and fired again. Another perfect bullseye, this one touching the edge of her first shot's whole dot by the third shot. The demonstration had moved beyond marksmanship into the realm of artistry. Rebecca was placing rounds exactly where she intended them to go with the consistency of a precision machine. Each shot validated her unauthorized training and proved that 18 months of secret preparation had produced capabilities that exceeded official standards. Rodriguez's face had gone pale as he watched his designated role being performed with a level of excellence he had never approached. Thompson stared at the targets with the expression of someone witnessing impossible events. Williams looked like he was watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. "Major Brennan," Admiral Harrison said, addressing the Fort Sterling commander, while keeping his eyes on Rebecca's shooting, "I believe we've identified the source of Fort Sterling's marksmanship problems. You've been excluding your best shooter because she didn't have the right job title." Brennan's response was barely audible. "Sir, this is ... unexpected." "What's unexpected?" Harrison replied sharply, "is that it took intervention from Allied Command to discover talent that should have been obvious to local leadership. Lewis has just demonstrated superior marksmanship skills, using equipment and techniques that your qualified personnel couldn't master." Rebecca fired her fourth shot, again achieving perfect accuracy. The demonstration was becoming a masterclass in precision shooting, delivered by someone who had been systematically excluded from opportunities to display these capabilities. "The question now," Harrison continued, his voice carrying implications that extended far beyond the firing range, "is what Fort Sterling intends to do with this newly revealed information about personnel capabilities." Williams made one last attempt to maintain institutional authority. "Sir, regardless of shooting ability, Lewis still lacks proper certifications and training documentation. Protocol," Harrison interrupted, "requires achieving mission objectives with available resources. Lewis has just demonstrated capabilities that exceed your protocol-certified marksman by significant margins. Are you suggesting that paperwork is more important than performance?" The demonstration continued for 20 minutes, with Rebecca hitting targets at distances and angles that challenged even experienced snipers. Each shot reinforced the reality that Fort Sterling had been systematically wasting exceptional talent while accepting mediocre performance from properly credentialed personnel. When she finally set down the Barrett rifle, Rebecca had fired 12 shots and achieved 11 perfect hits, with one shot that missed the bullseye by less than an inch. The target sheets told a story of precision that none of the base's official marksmen had ever approached. Admiral Harrison studied the results, then looked at the assembled Fort Sterling personnel with an expression that mixed disappointment with determination. "Effective immediately, Lewis is reassigned to precision marksmanship duties under my direct authorization. Fort Sterling will develop a new training program based on competence rather than credentials." The unauthorized action had become official policy through the simple expedient of superior performance. Rebecca had proven that preparation, dedication, and capability mattered more than institutional approval or bureaucratic barriers, as she cleaned the Barrett rifle with movements that revealed intimate familiarity with its mechanisms. Rebecca realized that everything had changed in the space of 20 minutes. She was no longer the ammunition clerk who counted bullets. She was the marksman who fired them with unmatched precision. But the most satisfying moment came when, Admiral Harrison made one final announcement that would reshape Fort Sterling's approach to talent identification forever. The aftermath of Rebecca's shooting demonstration unfolded like a carefully orchestrated military operation, with Admiral Harrison methodically dismantling the institutional barriers that had prevented Fort Sterling from achieving excellence. His first action was to convene an immediate meeting with the base command staff, where the implications of what everyone had witnessed would be addressed with military precision. "Major Brennan," Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of command authority, "we need to discuss the systematic failure of leadership that has just been exposed. For 18 months, this facility has maintained a marksman who couldn't hit targets at operational distances, while excluding someone who has just demonstrated world-class precision shooting capabilities." The conference room felt smaller, with Harrison's presence dominating the space. Around the table, Fort Sterling's leadership sat with expressions ranging from defensive to resigned, knowing they were about to face accountability for decisions that had prioritized bureaucracy over excellence. "Sir," Brennan replied carefully, "our personnel assignments have always followed established protocols and qualification requirements." "Your protocols," Harrison responded with measured intensity, "produced consistent failure while systematically excluding exceptional talent. Lewis has just demonstrated shooting capabilities that exceed European Allied command standards. Your qualified marksman couldn't hit targets that she placed shots through with mathematical precision." Williams attempted to mount a defense. "Admiral, we couldn't have known about Lewis's shooting abilities without proper evaluation through official channels." Harrison's expression suggested that such explanations were insufficient. "Sergeant Major, Lewis has been studying ballistic science, environmental factors, and precision shooting techniques for months. Her technical knowledge exceeded that of your designated experts. Yet rather than investigating her capabilities, you treated her expertise as a security concern." The rebuke carried implications that extended beyond individual mistakes to systemic problems with how the military identified and developed talent. Harrison was documenting failures that would have career-ending consequences for those responsible. Furthermore, Harrison continued, consulting notes he had taken during the demonstration. "The ammunition management at this facility has been exemplary under Lewis's supervision, while marksmanship training has been consistently substandard under current leadership. The correlation suggests that competence was being ignored in favor of comfortable assumptions about role limitations." Rebecca sat quietly at the far end of the table, still processing the transformation that had occurred in her status and responsibilities. From ammunition clerk to precision marksman in the span of a single morning, it felt surreal, yet entirely justified by the preparation she had invested in this moment. "Effective immediately," Harrison announced, "the following changes will be implemented at Fort Sterling. Lewis will assume primary responsibility for precision marksmanship training and competition preparation. Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams will be reassigned to positions that better match their demonstrated capabilities." The reassignments weren't punitive. They were realistic assessments based on proven performance rather than assumed qualifications. Rodriguez would focus on basic rifle instruction where his skills were adequate. Thompson would handle equipment maintenance, where attention to detail mattered more than precision shooting. Williams would manage logistics coordination, where his organizational abilities could be properly utilized. Additionally, Harrison continued, Fort Sterling will implement new protocols for identifying and developing exceptional talent regardless of current job assignments. Personnel who demonstrate superior technical knowledge or specialized capabilities will be evaluated based on performance rather than credentials. The systematic changes represented everything Rebecca had hoped for during her months of frustration, an acknowledgement that capability mattered more than credentials. That performance should determine opportunity rather than bureaucratic limitations. But Harrison wasn't finished. Major Brennan, your failure to recognize and develop obvious talent represents a significant leadership deficiency. You will attend a comprehensive course on personnel management and talent identification at the European Command Leadership School. The requirement wasn't disciplinary action. It was corrective training designed to prevent similar failures in the future. Brennan would learn to identify excellence in unexpected places and develop systems that promoted competence over comfort. 3 weeks later, Rebecca stood on the same firing range where her military career had been transformed. But now she wore the insignia of a precision marksmanship instructor. The Allied command evaluation had been a triumph. Fort Sterling's team had achieved the highest scores in the competition's history, with Rebecca's shooting setting new records for accuracy and consistency. The base's transformation had been remarkable. New training protocols emphasized competence over credentials. Personnel evaluations included assessments of technical knowledge and specialized capabilities. Most importantly, the assumption that job titles defined capability had been permanently abandoned. Rebecca's former ammunition depot had been converted into a ballistics research center where she developed training programs for marksmen across European Allied Command. Her secret preparation had become official curriculum. Her unauthorized expertise had become institutional knowledge. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same studying that had once been treated as suspicious activity was now being disseminated as official training material. The technical knowledge that had been viewed as overreach was now considered essential for precision shooting excellence. But perhaps the most satisfying change was watching other soldiers who had been underestimated receive opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities. The rigid hierarchies that had prevented recognition of talent were being replaced by systems that valued performance and potential. Admiral Harrison's final report on Fort Sterling became a model for military facilities across Europe. The document outlined how institutional barriers could prevent organizations from achieving excellence and provided specific recommendations for identifying and developing talent regardless of traditional role limitations. The Lewis case, Harrison wrote in his conclusion, demonstrates that exceptional capability often exists in unexpected places. Leadership's primary responsibility is creating systems that recognize and develop such talent rather than constraining it within artificial limitations. 6 months after the demonstration that changed everything, Rebecca received orders for assignment to the European Special Operations Command as their chief marksmanship instructor. The position represented recognition that her capabilities extended far beyond any single facility's needs. As she packed her belongings for the transfer, Rebecca reflected on the journey from ammunition clerk to elite instructor. The secret training had been vindicated. The institutional resistance had been overcome, and the principle that competence mattered more than credentials had been permanently established. But the most important lesson had been learned by everyone who witnessed her transformation. Excellence couldn't be contained by bureaucratic limitations. Preparation created opportunities even when none seemed to exist. And sometimes the most qualified person for a critical role was the one everyone assumed couldn't handle it. The story of Rebecca Lewis had become legend within European Allied Command, proof that talent, properly prepared and given opportunity, could shatter any assumption about capability and role limitations. Her Barrett .50 caliber rifle, now permanently assigned to her personally, had become the symbol of precision that exceeded all expectations. In the end, justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered with mathematical precision, one perfect shot at a time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.